WDET is supported by the College of Business Administration at University of Detroit Mercy. UDM's Master of Business Administration is designed to accommodate the career needs of professionals across a variety of work organizations. More information at business.udmercy.edu.
It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET. I'm Nick Austin.
And I'm Tia Graham. Today on the program, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. We'll hear a conversation from WDET's Nargis Rahman about mental health first aid training that's happening at Wayne State University.
But first, on the Metro. On Sunday, President Joe Biden spoke to a few thousand people at the Detroit branch of the NAACP's Fight for Freedom Fund dinner. In it, he had this to say.
We got through the pandemic. We're investing more money than ever in black families and communities. We delivered checks and deposits in people's pockets to reduce black child poverty. We're reconnecting black neighborhoods cut off by old highways and decades of disinvestment, including here in Detroit. Removing every lead pipe so every child, particularly in neighborhoods on the brink, can drink clean water without fear of brain damage. We're making the most significant investment ever in climate, including the most significant action in environmental justice ever.
On the campaign trail, Biden has been distinguishing himself from former President Donald Trump. Mostly, he's been emphasizing the fact that Trump tried to overturn our election on January 6th, and that he's now out for revenge. In 2020, Biden won Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, but right now the president is trailing Trump by 1 point in each of those states. That's why Biden came to Detroit now, because our city matters. And in 2020, Biden won Michigan in large part because he got 241,000 Detroit votes in his favor. So why is Biden trailing right now in the city? And is there anything he can do to turn it around? To discuss this, we're joined by two guests. Lauren Hood is the founder of the Institute of Afro Urbanism in Detroit and an assistant professor of practice at the Taubman College at the University of Michigan. Lauren, welcome to the Metro.
Thanks for having me.
We're also joined by Greg Bowen, who's a political and communications consultant locally in the Detroit area. Greg, welcome to the Metro.
Hello, hello.
So, Lauren, we'll just start here with you. When you talk to people in and around the city, do you get any sense of why Joe Biden might be having more trouble this time in terms of his polling in Detroit and Michigan generally?
Genocide, to keep it simple. Yeah, I can say, a few months ago, I went to hear Cornel West speak. When I was invited, I hadn't realized that it was a pro-Palestine rally, and there was a conversation with him before his talk, and I think there's a group of folks, brown folks in adjacent communities, that just aren't going to vote for him. There is no compromise. There is just an unwillingness to support someone who supports what is happening in Gaza, and I think for me personally, watching it unfold on social media, I think, okay, if it's those folks today, it could be us tomorrow. So I just feel we need to be able to vote for someone and not against their opponent. And I feel like right now that's all Joe's got, is we're all casting an anti-Trump vote. There is nothing exciting, inspirational, hopeful about what Joe is presenting. So I think if you want to close that 1% gap, you got to give us something to support versus showing up just to cast an anti-opponent vote.
To narrow in on this a little bit, one of the things that I'm thinking about here, or specifically meant to get into, is the black vote in Detroit. So when you're saying us, is that something that you're saying or hearing is animating black voters, especially older black voters in the city?
Well, we're not a monolith, so I can't say I'm speaking for all.
Oh, no, I'm not saying all. Yeah. You could say most, some, 50%, 70, whatever you got.
I don't know. It's tricky because my peers and colleagues span a lot of different types of folks. I would say who I spend the time talking to the most would be other middle class, legacy Detroiters who are adjacent to political systems and the power structure. And I would say we have questions. I think it might have been an automatic in the past. We're going to cast this Democratic vote, but now we want our candidate to work for it.
I'm not sure if that's the case, because if that had happened with Hillary Clinton and she had received the same support that she did for with Obama, then she probably would have taken Michigan. But Greg, I want to loop you in also. Why do you think Biden is behind in the polls right now in Michigan?
Hey, Lauren.
Hey, Greg.
How are you?
Very good.
I'm a big fan of Lauren for a long time, so it's good to hear your voice.
Right back at you.
She's out there making it happen. I disagree with the premise of your question. The foundation of it, because the polling shows that it is a dead heat. Not that Biden is statistically behind. It's statistically not, clear as to who would be there. And I've been thinking about this for a while and talking to people, and certainly the president's speech that happened on Sunday, was a really big deal in culminating that weekend. Now, they're not my clients. I don't work for them or anything like that, but I am a Democrat. Yeah. And I want to say, without fear of contradiction, that when elections roll around, it is our time to raise our voice and say what it is that we want. Now, there were people that I recall who were like, didn't support Barack Obama because they didn't think he was a real African American, meaning that, a direct descendant of slaves or people who were enslaved, and would hold that against him, while the rest of us could see what it meant to have a black man in that position. And so that was, when you said, Lauren, something hopeful,
Mm-hmm.
That was the kind that image sort of immediately came to my mind as being one of the most hopeful times. Now, you want to go back before that to Reagan, all the way back to Reagan and up. And the thing that we were always voting for, it seemed to me, was to just have a fair shot, in a system that obviously was created on the backs of black folks and created a hierarchy of race that produced a wealth gap and an education gap and all kinds of things that had occurred specifically based on race. And so we've often had that to push up against, in order to cast our vote and create a brighter future for ourselves. And I think in a post-Obama era, it's kind of different. Now, I was born the year, and this is going to sound like ancient, that they passed the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, 65. So by the time I got to elementary school, the idea of what we could lose as black folks was crystal clear in my parents' and grandparents' mind, and that fear was, I think, passed on to our generation because they, there were still old rusty signs up in some places that said whites only.
Yeah, but so, Greg, is that still something that is animating what we're seeing right now? Because if so, we would think that the polling would be a little bit better in favor of Joe Biden. If I think about some of the things that he's passed, Infiltration Reduction Act, Infrastructure, Chips and Science Act, these are all targeted things to try to increase wealth. So is that something that's still animating what's going on here, or what's the disconnect between the numbers and the effort, at least the narrative?
I think where the disconnect is that as we get close to an election, people start to pay more attention to what's going on. And we are now connected to news in a way that we weren't before. Folks are way more educated about issues than they were before. Now, I do have to say this. If there is anybody that understands oppression and understand what it's like to be downtrodden, it's black folks. We are naturally sort of, aware and concerned about what's happening in Gaza. But I will tell you, and with few exceptions, most people say that ain't our fight. That ain't our fight. Even though the black people, the servicemen that were killed, were black. So we have a disconnect sometimes, I think, in the Democratic Party amongst black folks and brown folks when we're not honest about race. Now, people will say that ain't our fight because they largely see Arabic folks as white folks. And we grew up in Detroit, so we're used to being around Chaldeans, Arab folks, Muslim folks who are from the Middle East. And it wasn't until recently that actually the federal government decided to give them their own category.
Well, that on the census,
they can mark off.
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, we can talk about the Black-Jewish alliance. We could talk about, the alliances and the way we feel about each other because we've all suffered under the yoke of a hierarchy of race. You know what I'm saying? And there have been distinctions. And so people will say, well, where were the Palestinians when Black Lives Matter? Where were the Palestinians when George Floyd happened? And so it's not so clear cut. I get it. We're angry because we don't like to see oppression. At the same time, folks will say that's not our fight.
Well, so that means from what I'm hearing from you before we loop you back in, Lauren, Greg, are you saying this is more of people sitting out the election? Or are you saying that there's some folks that former President Trump is peeling off in these polls?
I think when it comes to majority of Black folks, they're not going to decide their vote on Gaza. It's a terrible situation in lots of different ways, but go to Schoolcraft, Wyoming, and ask them about that. They're going to say that's not my fight.
Yeah. Lauren, looping you back in, you mentioned Gaza. From what I'm hearing, it doesn't seem to be as animating as maybe the circles that you're traveling in. But for President Biden, this can be a tension point, at least specifically in Michigan more broadly. We're looking at Detroit here for this conversation, hopefully. More so, just because we're narrowing it in on that. And this is when we get into this big tent idea, right? Because in order to succeed for Democrats, you've got to bring in a wide range of folks. Whereas on the conservative side, it seems like sometimes more narrow ideas. And one of the interesting things to hear you say, genocide, to me, it's the idea that it would get much better or different under the policy of President Trump doesn't seem to be there. So at the end of the day, if you're a voter, you got two choices. You can do stuff in the primaries at other times, but you only got two now, and a protest vote won't necessarily give you anything better. What messaging do you think, is there any that it would exist to bring in more Black votes that wouldn't alienate the other portion that he needs in order to win?
It's so hard. I hate that at this moment in our country's development, we're still at this two-party system. The fact that we have two white conservative, roughly senior citizen males to choose between is, I can't believe this is where we're at in 2024 still.
Right.
And it's hard because I think about how many of our ancestors fought and died for our opportunity to vote. So the thinking about, not wielding that power to make a statement in this moment, it's a lot to process, but I hate feeling like I'm forced to support somebody that I am not fully in alignment with.
I understand that.
We're
breaking down the
You're
politics
like, but you
here.
have to vote.
Well, no, I mean you don't have to do anything.
I know,
I'm having
I
a
know.
conversation about the politics of it right now.
Yeah.
So, Greg, before we get out of here, for you, what is the same question to you? What do you think is the message that Joe Biden needs to use in order to win in Detroit? Should he be making he be making the issues more about Trump, or should he be making it more about himself?
When it comes to us, when it comes to Black folks, in particular, we can't make the same kind of mistakes that we used to make in the past. There are more Black people who live outside of Detroit than inside the city of Detroit right now. And what does that mean? That means the challenges that we face cannot be limited by geographical boundaries, because if you live in Harper Woods, if you live in East Point, if you live on the west side of Detroit, if you live in Redford, the problems don't go away when you cross some magical line. And so the solutions and the answers to helping us move the ball forward and create a more fair and equitable society have to transcend that kind of stuff. And so I think that we are getting closer to that, because Joe Biden says directly, I need you. Now, Bill Clinton didn't say that, and Bush didn't say that. People didn't speak directly to Black folks, running for president in that kind of way. And I thought it was crazy when he first did it, but it sends a message, and people remember, he said, I'm appointing a black woman to the Supreme Court. And folks lost their mind. Oh, it's racist and this, that, and the other, and blah, 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 blah. And he did that, ran that gauntlet, told people he was going to do it. Now, that kind of thing, when you put it up against a Trump, and those folks who are, there's just no comparison. And so we have grown up and live in a world where we don't believe that government can really do much for us. We just don't want them to hurt us. We don't want them locking us up. We don't want them focusing in on us and that kind of thing. We want a fair shot. And that is the message that has to get out because, the truth of the matter is that folks today aren't trying to go work for AT&T for 20 years. They're trying to make their own way. Yeah. And we got to guarantee that in some kind of way.
All right. Well, we want to thank you, Greg Bowen, longtime political and communications consultant locally in Detroit area, and Lauren Hood of the Afro Urbanism and Institute, as well as Taubman College at the University of Michigan. Thank you both for joining us on the Metro.
Thanks for having
All right.
me. Bye, Greg.
This is the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. You just heard from Nick Austin. I'm Tia Graham, and coming up, we'll discuss the significance of marijuana's reclassification from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3 drug. You stay there for the Metro.
It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET. I'm Nick Austin.
And I'm Tia Graham. Last week, President Joe Biden addressed the nation by letting us know that the Justice Department proposes it will reclassify marijuana as a less dangerous drug. The proposal is historic as it shifts pot from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3 substance alongside ketamine and some steroids. This change may be a big deal. That's because marijuana is currently classified alongside drugs like heroin and LSD. And with the news comes different perspectives, some positives in the reclassification of marijuana and some oppose it. To discuss the proposed rescheduling of marijuana, we have Dr. Brittany Taylor here. Dr. Taylor is a Michigan State University assistant professor and the Alice Hamilton Scholar of the Pediatric Public Health Initiative. Dr. Taylor, thanks for joining us on the Metro.
Hi, glad to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you for being here once again. But, why is the reclassification of marijuana significant?
It is so significant because it moves, again, like you were talking about, it moves marijuana from this very high class of medications in the DEA from something that is labeled basically as having no medicinal benefit and a very high potential for dependency and abuse. And it's important to kind of think about the way that the DEA classification system is really what was created back in the 1970s was a way to kind of, for the Department of Justice to communicate with prescribers, specifically physicians typically, on what medications, if they were going to have any medicinal basis or if they were going to be helpful or if they were going to have a big risk for dependency and misuse. And with this change from Class 1, Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, it does allow for more research to basically be done on this. And I think that's super, super important as more and more people are using it both recreationally and medicinally for us to get more information about what kind of the short and long-term effects of cannabis, specifically their active components of THC and CBD are.
So, Dr. Taylor, why, if you have the answer, why was marijuana classified the way it was when it initially hit the Justice Department's desk?
So it was back right when the DEA was created back in the 1970s that marijuana was put into Schedule 1 classification. And there's a lot of politics that go into that, and there's a lot of hearsay about kind of what might have been going on. But this was President Nixon who created the DEA in something called in an act called the Controlled Substances Act, which gave the Department of Justice the authority and the power over basically drug trafficking. And it was was a kind of a move towards cracking down on specific, again, it's prophesized that this was a move that Nixon did in order to crack down on specific groups in America during that time. And so there is a lot of history, both politically and kind of historically, around why marijuana was classified as a Schedule I, which is not, looking back in hindsight, is not very pleasant to look at, and does have some underlying, thoughts about racism as well as health equity. A lot of the health, the thoughts on the war on drugs and kind of the judicial system and how that's come from that has come from this initial bill. And so, again, it's the initial scheduling of that had a lot to do with kind of the political environment of the time, as opposed to some of the evidence that's come up since then. So.
Yeah, Dr. Taylor, oftentimes we think about that when we think about just the war on drugs or, what happened in the communities that were impacted by the policies that were put into place and different things like that. We all know about what's happening with marijuana and people in prison for marijuana and there's so many different things, so many elements to that. But we're going to stick to right now what we're talking about, which is the reclassification, rescheduling of marijuana. We're speaking with Dr. Taylor, Michigan State University assistant professor and the second Alice Hamilton Scholar of the Pediatric Public Health Initiative. And Dr. Taylor, I think about Michigan. We're already legal here. So why is it important to have a reclassification here in Michigan? But more importantly, what does it mean in terms of research here?
So the big thing is that in a Schedule I medication, it is exceptionally difficult for researchers to study it, to actually give cannabis in any form to research participants. It's exceptionally difficult to not only pitch and get approved any sort of research study with that, but also it is exceptionally arduous to store that medication. When you think again about like heroin and MDMA are the other kind of medications that are other drugs that are classified as a Schedule I, we can kind of all understand why you can't just give people heroin just to see what happens. And so reclassifying cannabis or marijuana into Schedule III will make the ability to study this in clinical settings and research settings much, much easier, not only because it's just easier because of being able to get those research studies approved, but also the handling of it is much, much easier and less arduous and with a lot less monetary cost associated with doing the study.
Well, just looking at your background in general and looking at the pros and cons, what about those who may see this as a con, someone who may look at this and say, I don't want this readily available, or maybe I don't want this to be something that, can be easily obtainable by children. So what would you say to the cons? So
there are definitely a lot of cons because when they're doing this, a lot of times, even though it's very specific what the DEA is doing in this schedule, it doesn't talk about, the harm of it long term. It doesn't talk about the addictive potential. It's just kind of how the DEA views it. So this is a very specific kind of viewpoint of what the scheduling does in terms of the harms, especially short and long term, the risks, particularly to adolescents and kids getting a hold of these, they're still there. I always like to think about the fact that alcohol and tobacco are both not scheduled. We both always acknowledge the fact that tobacco particularly is super harmful. We all know what the harms of that is, particularly in our youth, but it is not a scheduled medication. So again, the scheduling does do some things that help to kind of change that. It's important that we temper the public perception of what this is doing, that just from scheduling it, moving it from a Schedule I to a Schedule III does not mean that we say, oh, this is great, you should use it all the time. Because again, things that are exactly Schedule III, they're not, they're also harmful. And it's something that we need to keep an eye on. So it's not, they didn't unschedule it. They didn't move it off the scheduling for a very specific reason. So again, it's important that it stays on the schedule, but we need to make sure that people don't think, oh, just because it's moving down in the schedule, that this is something that's safe and okay to use. And there's still a lot of research that needs to be done in terms of the short and long-term effects, which we continue to do. So.
Yeah. So my last question before I let you go, Dr. Taylor, is just about some of the myths, and you talked a little bit about that as well, but talk about how this research will help lift some of those myths and some of the public perception, maybe positive or negative, but whatever the public perception is right now, whether it's a pro or a con, how can this research help dispel some of that and start to move away from it?
So I think a big thing that this will be helpful with is furthering research around chronic pain as well as mental health. because it's very difficult to do studies on that right now just because of the kind of intermix, like the chicken or the egg, when it comes to using cannabis and marijuana recreationally, kind of like self treating with those sorts of things. And so this will help be able to do this in a more clinical setting in order to really see if we do have benefits when it's being administered in a certain way. And so I think a lot of people will reach for that when typical medicine is not really meeting their needs when it comes to mental health as well as pain. And I'm hoping that this will be a way to kind of be able to be like, okay, this is going to be helpful for this, or this is not going to be helpful for this. And right now, because of the way that the studies have to be done, it's just very muddled. And I'm really hoping that this move from the Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 is going to be able to clarify that answer, because I'd like to know as a physician, when I'm counseling my patients, and I know that my patients would also like to know that as well.
Yeah, Dr. Taylor. Thank you so much. Dr. Taylor is a Michigan State University assistant professor and an Alice Hamilton Scholar of the Pediatric Public Health Initiative, the second one. Dr. Taylor, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro to chat about the reclassification of marijuana.
And thank you for having me.
It's the Metro on 1019 WDET, and coming up, we'll discuss a new film about musician Brian Eno playing at the Detroit Film Theater.
This is the Metro on 1019 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Nick Austin. And tonight at 7, the Detroit Film Theater will screen the film Eno, which explores the 50-year career of musician, producer, and artist Brian Eno. The film uses a generative software system developed by Gary Hurstwit to combine interviews of Eno with his archive of never-before-seen footage and unreleased music. What's interesting about the film is that each screening of Eno is unique. It presents scenes in a different order, so the audience is watching the film as the generative software creates things in real time. In this conversation, Essential Music host Ann DeLisi spoke with producer Gary Hurstwit about the film's work and why he's excited about it.
This is the first generative feature film, so people will have not seen anything like this before. In fact, I will not see anything like this before, because every time I see the film, it's brand new to me and surprising. And that was really one of the reasons that I started the project. Like, I wanted to be surprised as the filmmaker every time I watch the film and see new things and new connections, and get a deeper insight into Brian Eno. Every time I watch it, because I'm seeing a different take on his story. And that's kind of what it does. It remixes the story in different interesting ways every time you watch the film. So you're seeing different scenes and different music and learning different things about him. But overall, it's compelling and engaging every time you watch it, no matter which stuff that you're seeing.
How many times have you seen the film?
I've seen it. I've seen all the pieces just hundreds and hundreds of times. I've seen the film itself. I think we've screened it now 20 times. So there have been 20 public generations of the film.
Wow.
The other thing is that it doesn't have to be finished in a way that a normal film would be, because we continue to add more things and can develop the software between screenings. So the first generation of the film that we premiered at Sundance is very different than the second generation, which we're into now and which we'll be showing there in Detroit. So the film itself continues to evolve because we're adding more content to it and more music and more things we're finding from Brian's archive. So we're giving it more raw material for it to kind of create this story each time.
One of the things that is happening while your audience is watching the film is that they can see the coding on the screen. Is that right?
Yeah, in different parts of the film, we sort of let the software show its process. So you're getting a little bit of a peek behind the curtain. and seeing it looking through all the different files that are on the hard drive. So you'll see, glimpses of things that, you might see talking heads or whoever, flashing up on the screen, and you may see those scenes later in your version, or you may not see those scenes later. So it's a way of, on one hand, showing that kind of there's a decision being made, or that there's a process happening, and also that there's a lot more content than you're actually seeing in this version.
I guess the most obvious question is, what did Brian Eno think of all this?
Brian Eno loves it because it's very organic to what he does and to his ideas of the creative process. When I first brought up the idea of doing a documentary about him, he said no, because he hates biodocumentaries and he hates music documentaries. Well, because they're always one person's version of this subject's story, and he didn't want to be anyone's story. So in this way, like in the generative film, his story gets to tell itself. It kind of acts like the way that our memory works. We don't remember things in perfect chronological order with a narrator telling us exactly, how we got from this story to the next story. We remember things differently, as at different times or as we get older. We call the software platform that we created for the film Brain One, which is an anagram for Brian Eno, but it actually is sort of like kind of rummaging around in his brain. You're seeing all these different ideas and points of his career and his personal story and the music and the bands that he's worked with, music. It's a really interesting way to make a film. And it's a new way to watch a film and also to review a film. Like, how do you review a film that's different every time that it screens? So I wasn't trying to kind of disrupt these different areas of cinema when I had the idea for the film. I just wanted it to be different every time. And a lot of it was just me questioning that idea, like, why do films have to be the same every time we watch them?
That was WDET's Ann DeLisi speaking with producer Gary Hustwit. The film Eno will screen at the Detroit Film Theater tonight at 7. For more information, go to dia.org.
On 101.9 WDET FM. That was Nick Austin. I'm Tia Graham. And when people consider first aid, they mostly think about treating physical problems. Maybe someone is bleeding, or maybe they're struggling to breathe. But that's not the only kind of first aid available. Seth Allard is a Wayne State social work doctoral student and a mental health first aid trainer. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and in this conversation, Seth spoke with WDET's Nargis Rahman about his mental health first aid workshops and why they matter.
The mental health first aid course has been around for quite a while. I believe it's been around since 2001. It started in Australia. And from Australia, it sort of spread out to other countries. When other countries' mental health or healthcare licensing bodies or institutions received a license from Mental Health First Aid Australia, it came to the U.S., I think it was in 2008. Ever since then, it's really taken off. It's really one of the more popular and effective mental health kind of gatekeeper trainings is what we call it. So some similar types of trainings are like QPR, question, persuade, refer. There's safe talk and assist, which is applied suicide intervention skills training. Those are provided by Living Works, primarily designed for the lay community, but clinicians and health professionals definitely benefit from them. I always look forward to giving the course. It's one of the funnest teaching experiences I've ever had.
What got you into mental health care work in the first place?
A few different things. My mom was her title was nurse consultant, I believe. When I was growing up, she worked for, I think it was 10 or 12 years at a regional behavioral health organization agency in northeastern Michigan, where we grew up outside of West Branch. So when I was a kid, I used to see her work with clients with developmental disabilities. So from a really young age, the idea that you would stigmatize individuals because of mental illness or a mental health challenge I was dissuaded from that, because I got to see my mother work with people, and she always humanized people really well. What really kind of pushed me into mental health, working in the area of healthcare as well, was when I was getting out of the Marine Corps. I started to notice what researchers were really only then starting to notice, which was there was a rise in suicides in the post 9/11 veteran population and the active duty component. When you are a part of a generation that is impacted by different effects towards your mental health and you are curious about it, you start to get sort of pulled in, like you want to know the rest of the story. So I got interested in studying suicide in the Native American community, my own community. And from there, I kind of continue to always have a theme of studying suicide and mental health, and also trying to understand the cultural aspects of that as well. So I kind of fell into it.
Can you tell me about the Mental Health First Aiders 5-step LG action plan?
You assess for risk of suicide or life-threatening behavior. You listen non-judgmentally. You give reassurance and information. You encourage professional help, and you encourage self-care and support strategies. Applying the LG action plan for someone that you might notice as having a substance use or an alcohol use issue, or someone who experienced trauma, or someone who is having suicidal thoughts. These can look differently how you apply it based on those situations. But you have something in your back pocket at all times. One of the things about having a common sense, applicable idea of how to be helpful is that it gives people confidence. There are a lot of people out there who are already empathetic listeners, who are critical thinkers, who are really good friends, and who are really good communicators, but they hear about the topics of mental health or suicide prevention or trauma, and they go, I don't know if I'm able to handle that. I'm not a mental health professional. You don't have to be a mental health professional to be of assistance and to aid people in your community. You do have to be a mental health professional to diagnose and treat. And that's a major message we put throughout the training as well.
And just if you want to expand on that, why is it important to have these kind of trainings available to the community?
A lot of people from the College of Nursing, some people from Wayne State's administration came out for the training. We had some of my fellow military veterans that came out and took the training. We have social workers and therapists. Even people who are in clinical training programs still benefit quite a lot, because you can know how to do an intake and an assessment and things according to an agency's protocols if you're working in a hospital. But that is a different context than you have a friend, you have a coworker. Maybe it's a trauma situation. Maybe a neighbor has gotten into a car accident and you want to care for them. Well, you're not in a hospital at that point. You're in the community. So having the tools and the confidence to help is really important for people. The reality that the mental health care system in the United States, it's in many ways dysfunctional. The medical system as well, medical care and the medical industry is enmeshed in everything regarding mental health as well. So when you don't have the appropriate policies and support and resources for the population in the United States, you're always going to have the need for people to understand, well, until there's more equity and equality and availability, quality mental health care and all the other preventative things that need to go with that to have a foundation for good mental health in the U.S., then you're going to have people who are going to need training.
Seth Allard is a Wayne State social work doctoral student. He spoke with WDET's Nargis Rahman about mental health first aid training. This is the Metro.
It is the Metro on 101.9 WDET. I am Nick Austin alongside Tia Graham. And Tia, growing up, one of my favorite places to eat was Red Lobster.
Indeed, indeed. It was a staple after church, or maybe Mother's Day, or wherever you were thinking about going. Red Lobster was the place to be. However, it has filed for bankruptcy. The company may not be completely out of business, but it's in a tight spot, partly because it's all-you-can-eat shrimp promotion. It went poorly. NPR's Alina Selyuk reported on this story.
On a busy corner in a Maryland suburb, a Red Lobster restaurant sits like an empty shell, closed abruptly, virtually overnight, one of dozens.
And this Red Lobster was open just a week ago, and now all the shades are drawn all the way down, and the lights are all the way down. And today, everything inside belongs to someone else. Someone won an auction to buy the entire contents.
Just several $1,000s for all the freezers, ovens, tables, and lobster tanks. The fire sale was prep work for the bankruptcy filing after a series of bad choices by a parade of executives. But Red Lobster did not get cooked just recently. It has struggled for a decade as diners have pulled away from big casual dining chains. In that world, Red Lobster is actually one of the originals, dating back to 1968.
Red Lobster is where America goes for seafood.
Generations of Americans cracked their very first lobster here. The chain exploded in the 80s and 90s. People from all walks of life came for celebrations and dates, munching on famous Cheddar Bay biscuits and the Valentine's Day special Lobster Fest.
Red Lobster for the seafood lover in you.
The original owner was Bill Darden, whose company still owns other casual dining giants, Olive Garden and Longhorn Steakhouse. Red Lobster has lagged behind, losing out on both ends to fresher, nicer, more local restaurants and to the rising tide of cheaper, quicker, fast casual spots like Shake Shack and Surfside Taco.
And this is where they got caught in the middle. This casual dining is just so competitive and it's competing with the fast casual.
Joe Lemma is a professor of hospitality at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. During this cultural shift, Red Lobster's finances floundered. 10 years ago, Darden Restaurants sold Red Lobster to a private equity firm, and the firm sold the chain's real estate. Instead of owning its property, Red Lobster now had to pay rent to someone else.
You know, they want quick returns. And often the restaurant business, it just doesn't always work that way.
Enter a new owner, Thai Union Group, which is the company behind the Chicken of the Sea brand. It's a seafood supplier, not a restaurant firm. It faced massive pandemic losses, plus inflation. There was cost cutting, a conveyor belt of executives, and no CEO for a year. Then came a reboot idea that turned into a jumbo disaster.
Ultimate Endless Shrimp is here.
All-you-can-eat shrimp, a classic promotion made permanent. Thai Union later blamed it for $11 million in losses that quarter. Here's a taste of some TikTok videos.
I'm going to eat 64 shrimp tonight.
I had 74 shrimp.
Round 5, 61 shrimps total.
70 shrimp is a light snack. How is that the record?
The goal was to get more people in the door, which definitely happened. What the company underestimated was how long those people would stay, for hours, buying not much else. Oh, and the price, which Thai Union's finance chief, Ludovic Garnier, had to explain to investors.
The price point was $20, and you can eat as much as you want, okay? For those who have been in the US recently, $20 was very cheap.
It was very cheap. The price did increase over time, but Thai Union CEO later said the Red Lobster ordeal left him scarred, wanting to never eat lobster again. Now, his firm is washing its hands off Red Lobster, abandoning its stake deep in the red.
That was NPR's Alina Selyuk reporting on Red Lobster's bankruptcy. The chain plans to keep hundreds of chains open during the bankruptcy process, hoping that a lender will give the restaurant another chance. And no shade to Red Lobster, but that's a no for me. They can go on and sail to the sea. Yeah.
All right. Well, it is the Metro on 101.9 WDET. And coming up, we're going to get into what's happening this summer at Belle Isle as they look to continue growth from visitorship that they had last year. We'll find out what went into that and the role the Belle Isle Conservancy plays when we return.
Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. Really quickly, I'm Tia Graham. Today, expect a high around 88 degrees, almost 90 degrees, so definitely pack the sunscreen. Nick Austin, also here.
That's right, and despite having one of its largest attractions closed for renovations, Belle Isle saw a 7% increase in visitors last year. We're talking about the Belle Isle Conservatory, which is scheduled to reopen this summer. One of the reasons behind all of the success on the island is the Belle Isle Conservancy, not to be confused with the conservatory. But to discuss the role of the Conservancy on the island and what they're looking forward to, what role they play, we are joined by longtime board member and interim CEO of the Belle Isle Conservancy, Maud Lyon. Maud, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you.
So for those who aren't familiar, can you tell us what exactly the Belle Isle Conservancy does in relation to the island?
Well, we are a community-driven organization. We are the nonprofit partner of the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. So the MDNR operates the park. They do the daily operations. But what we do is work on assisting with capital projects. And one project we've done in particular is the Belle Isle Aquarium, which we operate directly, and it's open to the public free because of our support.
Yeah, that was one of the things when you were formed in 2011 that wasn't running at that time. You guys were able to get it back open in 2012, and it's been open since. Why are these public-private partnerships able to accomplish things like this? How are you guys able to pull these kind of things off?
Well, there's some things that government does really well, and there's some things that the nonprofit private sector does really well. And so being able to, there are sources of support we can raise that the MDNR can't raise. So the aquarium is a good example of that. What really drives the aquarium is the donations that operate it, but also all of our wonderful volunteers. We have, if you count also another thing we do is the Keep Belle Isle Beautiful cleanups. So we have over 2,000 volunteers every year that are helping to pick up trash on the island, reduce plastic pollution. They serve as greeters at the aquarium. We have some that are tankscapers, so they do the displays inside the tanks with the fish and other creatures in it. We couldn't do it without the volunteers that make it happen. So that's the kind of thing that a nonprofit can do much more effectively than a state agency.
Yeah, and you also got a new litter cleaning robot called Bebot. I'm looking forward to that and seeing how that operates also. But can you tell us, in your opinion, what role should Belle Isle play for Detroit as well in its residents as well as the state as a whole?
Well, Belle Isle is the most visited state park in the state. At 5.5 million visitors a year, it is far and away the most visited state park, and it's also the second most visited state park in the nation. So not counting national parks, but state-operated parks. I think the only one that beats us out is Niagara Falls.
All right.
So Belle Isle is a real destination, not only for Detroiters, but people from the region and visitors nationally and internationally.
Well, what about the Giant Slide, though? Do you guys have anything to deal with that? Because that was making a lot of news.
It is, but a good news: the Giant Slide will be open this summer. It's operated by the MDNR. They've taken steps to make it safer, slow it down a little bit for people, and have a nice soft landing pad at the bottom. So they're just getting those final renovations done. A little later this spring, it will open again, and people can take the ride.
Yeah, no, Maude, I know you guys don't run the Giant Slide, but I did want to get into the fact that there are some things that you do and ways that people can help out. And I do want to give you an opportunity before we get out of here to let folks know if they want to get involved, see what you guys are up to, and potentially help out. Be one of those people helping keep the island clean. What should they do?
Well, our Keep Belle Isle Beautiful cleanups happen actually continually through the summer. We have one Saturday every month when people can volunteer. We also have a small fleet of kayaks, so we have volunteers that clean the canals and the waterways and keep those clean. We will be using the Bebot about once a month through the summer. So it's a really cool robot that digs into the sand and then pulls out, bottle caps and other things that get buried in there, which makes it a lot nicer for people on the beach and better for our waterways. One thing the public can do is, thanks to sponsorship from corporate sponsors, we're going to be open on Thursdays this summer. So starting June 13th, thanks to the Ford Motor Company Fund, Verizon, Comerica, and Allied Financial, we will be open 4 days a week free to the public, so Thursday through Sunday.
All right, we got that there, and we're going to have you back to learn more. Maude Lyon, longtime board member and interim CEO for Belle Isle Conservancy. Thank you for joining us on 101.9 WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. And that's going to do it for this edition of The Metro.
That's right. The show is produced by Sam Corey, David Lyons, and Jack Philbrandt. Our engineer is Nate Bender, and our assistant producers are Neil Scott and Sydney Walt Lee. Thank you all so much.
WDET is supported by the College of Business Administration at University of Detroit Mercy. UDM is offering a new master's degree in ethical leadership focused on sustainable, ethical, and inclusive problem solving. More information at business.udmercy.edu.